let us let us proceed, and there might be more people joining us as time goes on. But welcome all of you to the Psych Department's new Career Speaker Series. So we're hoping over the course of the semester to have maybe as many as 10 speakers. We'll see if we can actually achieve that. And this is really to give students some ideas about possible careers and the educational journey associated with those careers. So our first speaker today is Dr. Jen Rotters, who's a new professor in the Counseling Psych program, which is a master's program at UNBC. Now she's a professor, but today she's not going to be talking about being a professor. The focus today is really on her work experience outside of the university. And she's had applied work in forensic psychology, psychotherapy, psychological assessment. So each of those are, careers on their own and really interesting careers. So the talk today is going to be a pretty informal format. I'll be asking Dr. Rotters questions about her education, about her work, and some of the pluses and minuses of the different jobs. The last 15 minutes today is devoted towards for questions. But you can also submit questions in the chat. And we're going to ask you to submit all of your questions on the chat. But if you have a question as Jen is talking, you can put that in the chat. And Julie Howard will be monitoring those, and we'll decide, is this the kind of question that fits better at the end? Or is this kind of a clarifying question that should be addressed right now? So that's really the procedure today. I just want to make sure, yes, that you keep your mics muted while Jen is giving us her life history. And just before Dr. Rotters talks about her education, let me just clarify that in psychology at university, there are different levels of degrees. Some of you might know this already. I imagine some of you are in your undergraduate degree, so you're heading towards achieving a bachelor's degree. After completing your bachelor degree, many students go on to graduate school, and in graduate school, you can do a master's degree, and then you can follow that with doing a PhD degree or a doctorate degree. So Dr. Rotters has all of those degrees, and actually multiple of some. And so that's a very oversimplified way of understanding graduate school and some of the graduate degrees. But let's now turn to Dr. Rotters and learn a little bit more about her background. So can you talk, first of all, about where you did your undergrad degree, what your undergrad was in, and did you do applied work with your undergrad degree?
Sure. So, hello, everybody. It's actually Rotters, not Rotters.
Oh, Rotters. Okay.
My entire life history, people have called me Rotters, all those types of things. So I'm completely used to it. Not offended in any way, shape, or form. So going to this lovely degree, which is my honors undergraduate in psychology. So from high school, I had to do some, I don't know, searching in terms of what I wanted to do for my education, what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I thought maybe I'll do some hard sciences. In Ontario, which is where I'm originally from, they had something called OAC, and that's grade 13. I was the last year to get it. So now everybody in Ontario just has grade 12. So that was kind of a big piece of it. I felt like I was prepared well to kind of go forward, but in my OAC, I didn't do as well in the hard sciences. And then also I realized in looking at the courses, I'm like, sciences have labs, and that means there's more like class time, and I don't want to overwhelm myself. So I made a choice to do arts. And I want to do psychology because a lot of people kind of connected with me and wanted to share their I don't know, histories and lives and stuff like that with me. So I thought I might be well suited to it. So I dove in. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the stuff that I learned. I really enjoyed the program. I wasn't a huge fan of Toronto, but I did do some applied work because you want to kind of see where the rubber hits the road. So I did volunteer at a clubhouse model. So it's for individuals that have serious mental illnesses and they show up and sometimes they make food for people or they do like certain cleaning chores. It kind of emulates just a living situation, but it's supported by staff at the Canadian Mental Health Association. So I did have some applied work when I was in my undergraduate. I think that's everything that Lorraine asked.
And then you decided to go on and do a master's degree. Did you do that right away after your bachelor degree?
So I did. I did do an extra year. So I broke up my fourth year just because I was still deciding where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. So I am very big into sports. Rugby was my jam. I still play hockey because, gotta stay moving. But I was much better at rugby than hockey. So I was kind of thinking, maybe I want to do like sports psychology. So I looked around Canada and there's not a lot of sports psychology in Canada, unsurprisingly. So I started looking at the United States. And then Australia. I'm from a lower socioeconomic status family, so some of my choices were guided by that because, to be able to afford a flight and to move, on the other side of the world, it was a little bit more difficult. But even going to the United States was a little bit difficult, but it was a lesser. They had a sports psychology program there. And I knew I kind of wanted to work with people, like in a more applied sense. So the other degree on my wall, hidden by this beautiful plant, is a master's in clinical counseling psychology. And there's not a huge difference between clinical and counseling psychology, except for the, thesis kind of piece. You still have placements, you still have a bunch of stuff like that. I did work when I was in the United States. My visa permitted it. So I ended up working with court-mandated sex offenders who had intellectual disabilities. And they were on kind of a court diversion track. And our school had a counseling program that had like a placement for each one of the students that were in the PsyD program, which is like a PhD, but a little bit more applied. It's like a doctorate in psychology. So it was a student-run clinic, and then they had different teams. And so this court-mandated sex offenders with intellectual disabilities team was called the Step Up team. So I was part of that Step Up team. I was doing kind of more administrative stuff. But because I was eager and I kind of wanted to learn like some of the avenues, I attended like a lot of those teams just to learn. And I thought this one was particularly interesting. I learned a lot, a little bit more than I bargained for. But then it really kind of stuck with me. I ended up falling for forensic psychology, which is basically the study of individuals that go into corrections or mental health hospitals, people that kind of engage in crime, but some of it has to do with the mental illnesses that they happen to suffer from or addictions and things like that.
So were you doing this applied work as part of your master's degree?
No, so I kind of went above and beyond because our degrees, there were placements. I kind of selected more of a general because I wanted to see a little bit of everything in terms of disorders and stuff like that. So I went with a community mental health organization. But the attending the clinic team meetings was all additional because I was in the United States. Many of my friends and family were in Canada. I couldn't really afford to come back so often. So a lot of my time, I kind of just threw into more studies. I ended up reading a lot of the books in here because of it, like case conceptualizations and dialectical behavior therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment-based therapy, all of this stuff that I heard about. And you kind of only just get a general overview when you're in the master's. So I dove a little bit deeper, and I didn't have to necessarily do a thesis, but I did write a paper for it because I was hoping it might transfer over, and it did for my licensure, but it didn't for my second master's, which I'm sure we'll get to.
So, and you were at LaSalle University. Where is that?
That's in Philadelphia.
Okay. And so some of this forensic work you were doing kind of in parallel to doing your master's degree. And did you need to be in a master's program to be doing that work, or was it good enough that you had had a bachelor degree to be doing it?
Well, I had the accessibility because I was in the master's program and because I had a job working with that like clinic team. Otherwise, I don't think I would have had that
Yeah.
access. Um, if you want to volunteer in terms of like a forensic program, there's not too many opportunities. There might be like co-op placements, probably more so in the research areas as opposed to in the applied, because there are certain risks, of course, associated with just doing that kind of work.
And so, do you think that the master's program there is kind of equivalent to what's available in Canada in terms of counseling psych programs? Are they
Think so.
similar?
I would say so. So, in teaching now with the Masters of Education, clinical psychology program, I would say it's pretty similar to the degree that I had. Maybe a little bit more in regards to family counseling, because so my we had designations, which you don't have designations here. My designation was professional counselor, but you could also do industrial organizational there or marriage and family counseling there. So that's kind of the difference. So you could kind of like pick. So there was those options there, but here I think they tailor themselves more so to the BC Association of Clinical Counselors, which is a sensible plan. You can
Mhm.
still get other education while being licensed and stuff like that, though.
And did you say why you went down to the US? Because I imagine it's more expensive going to school down there. Was that the case?
It wasn't a state school, so it was more of a private university, technically an Ivy League, which I'm not even sure what that means.
Mhm.
Really beautiful campus, but it ended up being probably the same amount as my undergrad, where I did 5 years. But again, that has to do with living there and the exchange rate and things like
Mhm.
that. So I went down there because I thought I wanted to do sports psychology, which I still find super interesting. It's just in terms of jobs and availability, there wasn't much opportunity here. And I knew that I wanted to live and come back to Canada, not necessarily to Ontario, but I knew that there wasn't a lot of opportunities.
And what did you do with your master's degree once you were done? Was it a 3-year, 2-year degree?
2 year.
Two. Okay.
It was technically 2 years and a semester, but since funding was kind of an issue for me, I was able to kind of fit it all in. That and I was doing it full time. Like I didn't have another job that I was doing other than working at the clinic team, which wasn't a lot per week. So I graduated, and finding a job at first was difficult because I didn't have any connections. I was coming from the
Mm.
United States. Um, but I started to go down the College of Psychologists route. So I had a lot of my education credentials approved. They just, for some strange reason, they didn't like my psychopathology course. So I ended up doing an upgrade, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So 10 months after I managed to find a job, And it was working with a community outreach place up in Muskoka, Ontario. Specifically, it was Bracebridge. Muskoka is kind of like an area, very cottagey. Very small community as well. Covers a lot of distance and a lot of space, so that's why the community team was needed because individuals with serious mental illnesses, for them to successfully live in the community, they need some certain supports. For example, to go to psychiatrist appointments, get medications, even their activities of daily living. Like, so if you have to go grocery shopping, things like that. Because I had a master's specifically, I could provide counseling. Now, individuals that just had an undergraduate degree could work on this team. They would do more of like the activities of daily living, maybe just like some brief kind of crisis support, stuff like that. But since I had that training, I was able to offer therapy. So I did see some people in the office and in the community providing acceptance and commitment-based therapy, some dialectical behavioral therapy, CBT, all that type of stuff. Within that organization, I also ended up working with the crisis team. I only ended up working there for a couple months because I ended up getting a job at a bigger forensic or bigger mental health hospital. There was a lot of different departments within that hospital. So I ended up working with a geriatric population who primarily was diagnosed with some form of dementia, Alzheimer's, whatnot. However, they were in long-term care homes and they were striking out. So our job as the behavioral support intervention team was to go in and kind of figure out what were the triggers to like this violence. Because the individuals that we were working with, when you have dementia, you might not be able to make those kind of connections within the brain to say, like, I'm acting aggressively because of this reason. And a lot of it has to do with, if the elderly individual had to be toileted or bathed, or even if they're not able to go home, that kind of is a big piece. Sometimes even if they had end of life behaviors, unfortunately. And then also deliriums, which can sometimes be caused by urinary tract infections or medication changes, things like that. So a lot of it was just kind of creating these behavior plans, raising awareness, things like that. I did that for about 8 months. And then I ended up getting a job, my main job, in the forensic mental health area of that hospital. And so this was for, I think it was 120 beds, maximum secure forensic unit. And we saw a lot of the worst of the worst. Now, because Paul Bernardo didn't end up there, I can say that he almost ended up there. So we saw a lot of like kind of different types of people, because even within the forensic mental health division, there were different aspects. So there was the forensic assessment unit that primarily the psychometrist, I was a psychometrist, and I can explain what that is in a second. The psychometrist mainly did psychological assessments to guide the individuals where they needed to go, whether it was back to court or admitted or to jail. So what a psychometrist is somebody that does psychology and primarily does some kind of measurement of such. Usually not licensed. It's kind of an older term. And I think I was one of the only individuals that was able to be licensed, because in Ontario, you can be licensed with a master's of clinical psychology with the College of Registered Psychologist. We also have the College of Registered Psychotherapists, which is something else. Anyway, so I ended up working on a different unit, which originally was called active socialization. What you saw was kind of more severe individuals, whether they had to be in seclusion, which means they were just in their rooms behind closed doors because they posed too great of a risk, or they had kind of active psychosis symptoms, or they need to get fit to stand trial, things like that. To get into a forensic mental health institution, you have to be deemed either not criminally responsible by reason of a mental illness, or you're not fit to stand trial because you're having too many active symptoms. So the psychometrists and the employees' jobs are to basically help that individual get fit to stand trial. So they have to understand basically the ins and outs of what the court system does, that kind of thing. Not whether or not they believe that they committed the crime. That's the actual court proceedings. So I worked there, and then I ended up working in the research area as well because I knew that I wanted to go back to school to get a PhD.
So how long were you in that position? At,
I want to say it was about 4 years, and then like maybe 6 months in the research one. So overall, I think I was at Wade Point, which is the name of the hospital, if you want to look it up. Probably about 5.5 years or something like that.
okay, so that's a pretty good chunk of time. And you didn't say why you moved from the other job that you were in before, working with the elderly, to this job. What was that decision? How did that
So I,
happen?
I always knew that I wanted to work with forensics. So ever since I had that experience at LaSalle University, I knew that I wanted to kind of go back there. Like I was completely open to whatever experience happened. Like if I really loved working in the community, I would have stayed there.
Mm.
I found that it just wasn't a great utilization of my skills. Like a lot of it was more of like the activities of daily living. And then when I worked with the elderly, a lot of it was behavior plans, which is great and which is what individuals in psychology do. But I wanted more. I wanted kind of to do, oh, the world was not enough, I guess. So I wanted to be able to do the assessment. I wanted to be able to do group and individual therapy. And then kind of closer to the end, I was like, I really like this research thing because I really subscribe to the scientist practitioner model now. Mm.
Mhm.
So yeah.
And can you say a bit more about what a psychometrist does?
Yeah. So a psychometrist, the term kind of overlaps with psychological associate in Ontario. And basically that person, you're kind of like the measuring, the quantification of psychology. So a psychometrist could be a research psychometrist or they can be a clinical psychometrist. The research psychometrists you have the ability to do a little bit more in terms of assessment, probably because you have a master's or higher training or something like that. Although I did know older individuals that were psychometrists that had undergraduate work. However, they were kind of more closer to retirement. So they were hired probably, I don't know, maybe in the 80s or something like that. And times change and terms change and stuff like that. Generally, you're doing some kind of therapy or group therapy if you're a clinical psychometrist. Sometimes you're doing assessments. We did a lot of the psychopathy checklist revised. Sometimes IQ tests, depending on what the psychiatrist was kind of querying. But yeah, those types of things.
Okay, yeah, that's a broader set of tasks than I would have imagined, which is showing my own ignorance. But yeah, so I didn't realize that the psychometrist position also typically involved therapy as well. So that's okay. So that's a
It's interesting.
term that people can look up when they're looking at career directions
I
and
think it's an older term. You might
Mhm.
still see it. I was still seeing it occasionally in Ontario, but it is something that you could potentially look into.
And what was the salary like at that place?
That was pretty good. Well, what's the starting? I think the starting was maybe 75, and it might have gone up now with inflation, and it was unionized as well, which kind of pushes how much of a steps they can go up. And I think the upper was 105. It might be like 110 or something like that. So it's a
Okay.
decent paying job.
Yeah.
And it depends on, and the psychometrists weren't just in the forensic. There were some in the addictions unit. There were some in the dual diagnosis. That was annually. I can see that
Mhm.
question. It ended up being what was the hourly? I think like 38 to 48 or something like that. An hour or something like that. You can look it up. I think you
Mhm.
can still see the job ads from Waypoint Center. Um, and that's in Penetanguishene, Ontario, if you're interested. Um, Yeah, so there were different psychometrist positions on different units as well. I believe there was one also on the geriatric unit. We were part of the outpatient unit, but there was some for the inpatient unit as well.
And did you work in a team in the forensic mental health psychiatric place? And what would you say were the pluses and minuses of that job, and why did you ultimately want to go on with research?
Well, I definitely knew that I wanted to go on in terms of my education. So I'll say that first and foremost. Now, I did work part of a team. There was a lot of nurses, both that had 2-year degrees and then 4-year degrees. They worked very long hours, usually 12-hour shifts. And unfortunately, they were often the target of violence
Mm.
from some of the um, patients because you use the term patient when somebody is an inpatient, they were inpatients. Because a lot of individuals don't want to take the medication. There's a lot of side effects that they don't necessarily like, whether it causes weight gain or interference with like sexual drives or things like that. There's also a big issue of burnout. So I'm kind of used to more difficult individuals. So I always joked that I specifically expected what the patients, like the violence and like the risk and stuff like that, but I never expected that a lot of the individuals that work there were kind of like verbally burnt out and just would take it out on a lot of other people. So I look young.
Mhm.
I was very eager. I loved like what I did. And I would often get an earful like, you think you're coming in here and you're gonna change stuff and da, da, da. I'm like, I'm here to support whatever the clients need.
Mm.
And usually like my approach really diffused people. By the end, like I didn't have like a lot of problems with anybody because they kind of saw that like I was kind of part of a team. And you'll see that with like higher risk situations. It kind of reminds me of like kind of going into the army where they have to break you down and build you back up. You just have to
Mm.
be mindful of your humanity in the entire situation. I had a little bit more self-care in that I made a little bit more money, and I had a little bit more education, so I had more tools at my disposal. So I kind of felt bad somewhat for the nurses because they were put into a lot of different boxes. They were supposed to be, doing the medication related stuff. They were also security. So they kind of had to go in. We had like full riot gear, by the way. So when we had to go in because I have stories. I'm not going to tell you the stories here. I don't want anybody
Mm.
emotionally scarred today, but
Mm.
um, we had to get like dressed up to remove people from rooms just to make sure the rooms are safe and clean and things like that. And sometimes the patients would fight. That would just be their cue, their daily or their it wasn't daily because that puts a little bit too much stress. Sometimes it was 3 times a week, sometimes it was twice a week, to go in there and basically restrain an individual and get him to feel safer. And I'm saying him because it was all a male unit, and then clean things up. But the that takes a toll. That takes a toll on individuals, and we see that with the police and things like that. We are human. So even if you choose to go into these types of fields, you have to be cognizant of your own mental wellness and burnout and things like that. Because once you get burnt out, it's very hard to come back from it. I knew that I wanted to do this sort of thing. In terms of me getting burnt out, it was probably more so from the organizational standpoint where psychometry was not as valued and there wasn't as much support. So I did work within the team, and I knew that I wanted to kind of inform what the team was doing with evidence, because at the clinic team meetings, I would bring these types of things up. I'm like, maybe we should do something like that. And psychiatry has their own idea. And nursing definitely has their own idea, but they also tend to not be listened to as much as well. There was recreation therapists, there were social workers. There was also a different position, and I can't remember what it's called. It was like something called a PCA or something like that. Basically, it was somebody that was a personal care assistant, or they had this degree, but they ended up pushing them into more of a security thing. So they would watch like the security cameras, and if there was an incident, they would be kind of like the first ones running and things like that. So I knew that I wanted to have more autonomy. I would make this joke with various supervisors that I had, and they'd be like, "Oh, you only have a master's." It's
Mm.
like, wow, okay. But that sometimes is how it's looked upon, at least, and it could have been, because of some of the identity politics. Like I am a smaller, white, young female. So perhaps that could have been part of it. I don't know. But it is something to be mindful of. So I always knew that I wanted to go back. And I think the timing was good. So I spent 5 and a bit years like at that organization, and it was just time. It was time to go back. It was time to grow. It's kind of time to just spread your wings and figure out the next area of life.
Do you think so? This is not uncommon for psychologists to be working in teams, especially in different types of like either in hospitals or in prison situations, and that the psychiatrist is the kind of top of the team or the one that ends up having more of the power. And I've friends of mine who have worked in that kind of circumstance have been very frustrated because there's such a different educational journey for medical doctors and psychiatrists versus psychologists. And it can be frustrating to not necessarily have the autonomy or to be able to put into practice things that there's a strong evidential reason and background for doing something, but you don't get to make that decision necessarily.
No, it is kind of difficult. A lot of the psychiatrists did respect what I was saying. Part of it is because a lot of them wanted testing done. So you can't really bite the hand that feeds per se. So as long as you can kind of express yourself in a respectful way. I also tend to use a lot of humor in how I talk. I mean, I want to have a good time when I'm at work. Like, I don't want drama. I just want to be able to do what I love doing. So I think they also saw that and appreciated it. And since I tended to work with more difficult clients, like difficult to treat, specifically individuals that have borderline personality disorder, not a lot of the team wanted to work with because they tend to have higher needs. You liken them to individuals that have been burned. Like if you know somebody that has had like a third-degree burn, if you were to like touch anywhere or even like breathe on that area, like it's like a shock, it's a reaction. So you really do feel for the individuals that are diagnosed with that, and also at the same time within the system, because inpatients is not the suitable place to provide that sort of treatment, but sometimes that's where these individuals are. So, yeah.
And And did your position require that you had a master's degree? Could someone with a bachelor's of psychology, would they have been hired for that position?
In the 80s, yes, they would have been
Mm,
with an undergrad, but now kind of with this academic inflation, I also would have felt underprepared for this position if I had just my undergrad.
yeah.
I think the extra education really helped, specifically the applied piece, like how to talk to individuals, how to provide treatment, how to kind of like run through the entire kind of treatment process from diagnosis to treatment to ending treatment to like relapse prevention and things like that.
So, okay, so you decided that it was time to make a change, that you were interested in pursuing more education. And before I get you to talk about that journey, did you, as part of that journey, have more applied work, or did that journey ultimately lead to your professor position?
Ultimately, it ultimately it led to the professor position. However, since I subscribed to the scientist practitioner model, there was still some kind of like applied pieces that were here, scattered here and there throughout.
Okay. Okay. So tell us about that and what did you like when you say that you wanted more education, did you feel like there were more skills that in the job that you were doing as a psychometrist, did you feel like there were more skills that you needed or wanted in dealing with the kinds of psychological problems and mental health issues that you're dealing with?
So when you do testing, it's important to have knowledge of statistics and because you need to know where the individual sits in terms of where the test has been normed. And I kind of had a handle on it, but like not big. I had been out of math for a long time, so I knew that was an area of need. When I did apply, I took a look at a professor whose interests aligned with mine, and I reached out. I had kind of a person that knew her, so that kind of helped. So it boosted my street cred, I guess, with her. um, so we ended up connecting, and I said that I would help one of her graduate students collect data at Waypoint Center. So that was still like an applied thing that helped, like that happened throughout, where I, as a master's student, was mentoring a PhD student who wanted to do more applied work, which was kind of an interesting dynamic. I'm still friends with this individual. She's absolutely wonderful. Hopefully, I'll be able to get her to come here and talk. Um, but aside from that, I originally applied to the PhD program. My professor thought that I would be able to do just like a statistics course and then be able to, just start in on the PhD. The registrar, for whatever reason, at Brock University did not agree about that and said that you are going to apply to the master's program and we can admit you to the master's program, but that's what we can offer. And I'm like, well, I knew that I wanted to get a PhD. I will do this. Let's go. And people often say, like, were you mad? I'm like, well, spite is a very powerful motivator, of course. So when people tell me you can't do that, I'm like, watch me. So I did it. I was a little bit embittered at first. But now looking back, I realize it was kind of important. It did get me a lot more statistics training because I was admitted to this social personality stream. And because I did a lot of, thanks, Nick, Spite is awesome. And this is from like an East Coast person. I didn't realize that people from the East Coast could be spiteful. So noted, noted. Um, so I ended up because I was doing a lot of the personality disorder work. That's why personality psychology kind of fit in. Social psychology, like I kind of knew about. And I still do like a lot of the stuff within there, but I'd say that I kind of lean towards more of the personality stuff. But also, since I already had another master's degree, I already kind of did a lot of this stuff. I was like, I don't really want to take a lot of like the content courses. Like, what kind of transverses psychology. What are people uncomfortable with? Stats. People like run away from stats. And to be honest, like since I was out of it, like I was not good at it at first. It was messy. It was a very messy transition. And going into like my experience with the applied like part of psychology is great. Like it's sunny, everybody's amazing. Like I love them. The research, it is a cold, dark atmosphere. Empathy, no. Um, and that's not everybody's like experience. But I also thrive in like adversity. Uh, so I faced the adversity. I did every single statistics course that I could possibly take, literally. So I started off with just like the general master's one, and I bumbled through the first half. The second half, I aced. I ended up with an A in the course. It was blood, sweat, and tears, though. I was in my TA's office all the time. While I was there, Brock has this great thing where they basically allow or they like if you do not specify that you don't want it, you're just assume that you are going to do TAing, which is great because yay, you get some money. And like all these programs are not funded. You have to apply to funding, which I actually learned that I was decent at, which is an aside. So I didn't have funding at first, so this was great. And that's kind of like more of an applied area. So you get to teach the stuff and it helps you kind of learn it on a different level. So I started off with the forensic and social psychology courses, and then I ended up at the undergraduate statistics course, which was a lot of fun because you get to watch like people transform in their journey from being completely terrified to stats, being angry with stats, but then realizing, hey, this is just another tool for my toolbox. Another applied area that I kind of had throughout was I was the mentorship lead. So we had like kind of this student run like social committee, and underneath it there was just like the social committee, but then there was also the mentorship. So I was in charge of creating these confidential like kind of pairings between like a more mentor student, maybe like in a PhD 1, 2, 3 or something like that, with more of a junior researcher, whether it was a PhD 1 or a master's. So that was kind of drawing on my previous experience of being a counselor and things like that, because you have to be mindful of like confidentiality and how these kinds of things set up. And, if there's potential conflicts, which I didn't really experience a lot of conflicts or anything like that. So that was a little bit more applied. I'm trying to think of all my volunteer experience because I also did like some coaching and organizing. And I think that was maybe a little earlier on, but yeah. So I still did a little bit of like the applied stuff, but I found that the research really took up and like that level of learning took up a lot of my time. I knew that I wanted to study more applied things. So my master's thesis and PhD dissertation were kind of more applied. So in learning about statistics, you'll learn about mediators, and mediators essentially are mechanisms like through a relationship could happen. So what I specifically study now is childhood adversity as it relates to personality outcomes, specifically borderline and psychopathic. But that relationship can be through some concepts. So attachment being one, like the way that you attach to your caregiver, and then also mindfulness, your ability to be mindful in the moment. And those two things are very applied because you can teach how to be mindful. Specifically in dialectical behavioral therapy, I was teaching people how to be mindful, and I noticed that there were some changes. This research wasn't done, and a lot of people didn't believe it, which is why I was like, I'm gonna study this. I'm gonna show you. And then attachment. Some people think that, personality can't change. For example, personality psychologists believe like it's static. You can't change this stuff. Clinical psychologists are like, people become a little bit more warm and stable as they age, so we disagree. And then there's like this infighting because why would anybody get along?
So
So it takes a while
with
to change, though, to be fair.
when you were doing your PhD, then were you able to? Was your supervisor working in these applied areas, or was that something that you had to kind of venture into on your own? And I'll ask that question, but also I want to just keep track of time here because we are moving into our question period. So yeah, that was that something. Did you look for a supervisor that was specifically working in that applied domain? Because this is something different about graduate schools. You often want to find a supervisor that's really working in the area that you're interested in. And you can be a little bit strategic about that, kind of thinking, okay, do I want to be in a more applied field, and making sure that the supervisor can kind of help you get there.
Yeah, so my professor had interests there. She didn't specifically work there. She wasn't like licensed in terms of that. She wanted to offer a lot of that for her students, but the program kind of had some issues revolving around that,
Mm,
that they didn't want her to specifically go down that route. They wanted her to kind of remain within the research domain.
mm-hmm,
And this can be in a lot of universities as well. So if you're looking for more applied stuff, definitely look for a more applied university or program within the university, things like that. But she had like the applied interests, and she was amazing in that she allowed me to kind of come up with things myself. She was like, if you think of bowling, and how you have like the bumpers on either side if you're not particularly good at bowling, so then the ball kind of like goes off all over the place and it eventually goes in the right direction. She acted as that. By the end, I was like kind of like straight and narrow and kind of like knew that, but like whenever you're learning, it's hard and you kind of need like that level of support, that safety net and stuff like that. So she was great in that way.
and your registration as a licensed college, being licensed with the College of Registered Psychotherapists, you were able to achieve that with your master's degree, right? You didn't need your PhD for that.
No, so in Ontario, they have the College of Registered Psychotherapists, which was like just created when I had just gone back in like 2016 or something like that. So I was able to kind of be grandfathered in.
Mm.
Here at UNBC, our master's program, I'm pretty sure that it lines up really well with the BC ACC, which is the BC Association of Clinical Counselors. You can also get licensed with, what is it? CCPP or something like that. It's a Canadian Psychotherapist Association, which was a lot less onerous than the BC one.
Okay, well, let's open this up to questions. Do any of you have some questions for Jen? Nick?
Thank you, Nick.
Oh, I was just clapping. Really nice
Ah,
job. Yes.
Thanks. I like to think my life story is not finished yet. There's still some building.
Julie.
Hi. We covered all the questions that were in the chat already, but if anyone else has questions for Dr. Roders, please go ahead and type it into the chat. I just wondered, because you said that you can register as a psychotherapist with your master's degree, what value do you feel that getting your PhD added to your career path?
That is a great question. So having had a master's and then going back for a PhD, the PhD just gives you more freedom. Like you can, like I always joke, I'm like, I am the adult now. Like I sign off on my work. Like as a master's, they still might potentially want you to kind of seek consultation with a psychologist. If you are licensed already, in an applied setting, they might not. But I kind of wanted to affect a bigger change. And I find getting a PhD, people take a look at you as being a doctor, a little bit, I don't know, there's a certain power you have to be. And I say that with the theatrics, just because there is a power like to get more letters after your name, because it'll allow you to say, you know, I am an expert in this field. I've spent blood, sweat, and tears on this type of stuff, literal hours and hours and hours. And so not a lot of people can argue with that piece. Identity politics aside, like you can't take that piece away. And sometimes I had a mentor who actually is down on the island now, and he said, you know, if you're working one-on-one with individuals, like people can always come back and say, you know, like, oh, I wish you had done this, or I wish that we had have like done that or something like that. But when you have like that piece of paper up on the wall, that's like something tangible, cannot be changed. I'll also point over there, like I have my printed out and bound. They're beautiful. My master's thesis and my PhD dissertation, like nobody can take that away. Nobody can change that. But like with people, people are messy. People can change. People can come back and say, like, you're the worst psychologist I've ever seen, even though you had a great relationship with them. And you might actually see that with individuals that have personality disorders. Sometimes they love you, sometimes they hate you, and sometimes they never want you to leave. And you see that a lot with individuals with borderline specifically. So I think I wanted something a little bit more tangible. I think I wanted a little bit more power. Now that I have that power, am I frightened of that power? Oh, heck yes. It's something I'm trying to be mindful of all the time. I don't want to be drunk on power or anything like that.
I have a question.
Yay.
Just simple. Any advice you'd have for current undergrad students thinking about getting into this line of work? Like what kind of things they could do now that would help make their journey easier, and just like research assistants, honors, things like that, like what sort of things like that.
For sure. So always have like an overarching goal, and then like little goals kind of come underneath it, first and foremost. That's why I always kind of like joke. I'm like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm still growing up, by the way. So like there's always goals. There's always overarching goals. So have that first and foremost. It'll help guide what you want to do. And looking for those opportunities, whether you're connecting with professors, just having a chat. Sometimes through those chats, you come up with ideas. You can do research assistant stuff. You can volunteer in a lab. You can talk to professors who might have more applied knowledge, and they might be able to direct you to places that you could volunteer, whether it's like a crisis center or something like that. I'm not as familiar with everything in the area just because I'm new, but I know that John and Linda know a lot of like these places around as well.
We have another question that came into the chat. Did you find taking time after your master's to work was beneficial, or looking back, do you wish you had gone straight from your master's to your PhD?
Great question. I'm one of those people that I'm like, if anything had have changed, I wouldn't have ended up here, so I wouldn't change anything. So I really think that the working helped kind of solidify me in what I already knew that I kind of wanted to do. I needed to take time off just because I needed to pay off loans because I paid for everything myself. Now, like there can't really be a regret there because like I didn't have any funding elsewhere. At that time, like there was no funding that I could have potentially gotten here, but like here I was funded, especially with this PhD. Like that, getting that funding like was huge. It was like a lifesaver. So I wouldn't have changed anything. I honestly think that it was a great learning opportunity, even though there were like pluses and minuses and things like that. Because at least like now, you know, like glad I'm still not there. I'm glad I'm here in this sweet office with my view of the mountains. Everything kind of like culminates. Things happen for a reason, I guess. in my lab. I've come up with my own saying. My students are making me drunk on power now because I'm like, oh, you can't quantify magic. And they were like, oh my God, that's beautiful. I love that. And I'm like, okay, I'm trademarking that right now. And I think there is a certain, like, all joking aside, there is like a certain degree of like unpredictably, like, would I have ever guessed that I would end up here? Because like I never thought to be like, I'm gonna be a professor. The great thing about a professor is you have like so much latitude to do kind of like, you know, whatever you want to study, you can make it into something. It's like a lot of creative work. So there is a certain magic to it. You have to allow the universe to give you these things so then you can hit it out of the park.
Let me add something to that, Jen. The you know, this kind of point in your journey, it is really difficult right now to find people with your qualifications to teach at universities. So people with a kind of with clinical psychology background, with licensed counseling psychology backgrounds are in such demand for academic positions. And you know, like we I don't think we could actually hire a clinical psychologist in our department because there's such a shortage of them that are interested in going into academics. So you're actually kind of exceptional in your decision to go into academics. A lot of clinical psychologists and you know, registered psychologists are not choosing to do that. So that this is the area where there's an enormous need for people and where you will have no problem getting a job. And that's different from a PhD in an experimental program where there's a glut of graduates from those kinds of programs. And it can be quite difficult to get a job and incredibly competitive. So yeah.
It's about that balance. I am very astutely aware if there's like an imbalance in things. And I think I wanted to get into teaching because I saw a lot of people try to do the right thing, but you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, they say. So sometimes we can be doing harm to our patients without even knowing, our clients in the community. So at least if I can help the students have this framework of, you know, if you don't know something, like reach out. The goal of this program is not to become like an expert to begin with. It's to like cultivate where to look, like to get that help and where to learn stuff. And just kind of having that humility. Humility is a huge one, even for new professors who are quite outspoken and thespian in their ways of speaking.
So any other questions?
And if there's not, people can also email me. That's cool.
Okay. Well, Jen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you opening up our career series, and we might bring you back again because I know that we've had pretty short notice for your talk today, but it's been really great to hear about your journey and to learn about these different activities, and also the fact that you went to school in the US, and you know it's really a useful thing for people to have a certain amount of flexibility in where they're going to go to graduate school. And, you know, it's not forever. So the idea of going away, getting that experience and coming back, you learn a lot from that as well.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I've been everywhere, man.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And thanks to all of you for showing up today. So, next week is our talk with Olivia Jaswell, who did her undergrad degree here at UNBC, and she's going to be talking about school psychology, and we'll be telling you all about that. School psychology is not a counselor in high school, so that's That's working in the school district to develop plans for kids with different, a whole variety of learning needs. So yeah, same time, same place next week for that talk. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.